And good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joey Chen. When it comes to improving this country's public education, there are endless hopeful headlines about charter schools, voucher programs, and districts that offer open enrollment to anyone who wants to be there. But for all the promise and the progress of the school choice movement, the simple reality is that hundreds of thousands of students remain trapped in failing school districts because of their zip codes. As America Tonight special correspondent Soledad O'Brien found out, every year thousands of students try to get themselves into better schools by illegally enrolling in districts they don't live in. And school boards are now taking extreme measures to crack down.
A few miles down the road, it's a different story. Barringer is considered one of the state's worst performing schools. Violence is routine. In October 2012, a male student was stabbed to death. 2 years earlier, a female student was sexually assaulted in an empty classroom.
They don't have a choice. They're stuck.
They cannot go to another public school.
No. And that seems to me so hellaciously unfair.
Not everyone is stuck. New Jersey does have charter schools and an inter-district transfer program for a small number of students, less than 3% of the total. And the high-performing school districts want to protect their borders. After all, it's mostly their local property taxes that are paying for the schools.
Schools try to be vigilant about creating a registration system that confirms that the children who are enrolled in the school actually live in the district.
Because the people who live in a wealthy district are funding the education.
They are personally funding the schools. It all comes on the backs of those taxpayers. So if you say, well, there's a kid from Newark who's trying to sneak in, we're not going to pay for that kid. He doesn't live here.
Because that way they're always going.
Private investigator Jimmy Messis knows the extremes that schools will go to keep students out. He's built his business on it. Messis launched Verify Residents 5 years ago in response to the growing number of school districts that were reaching out to him to make sure all their students lived where they said they did. It's a kind of suburban border patrol. From his surveillance van equipped with a secret periscope and wall-to-wall monitors, Messis and his partner Jim Nanos have tracked hundreds of students.
So how does it work? I mean, walk me through the process. Does a school reach out to you and say, we have a suspicion about a student?
The school will reach out to me and they'll say, we'd like you to do an audit of our student roster. We'll run the student names through the database, but it might often come back as totally out of district, out of town, out of state. In New Jersey, we've had a lot of cases where the students actually lived in Pennsylvania or New York City and they were coming to school in New Jersey, and we'll immediately be able to identify those kids.
There are no real statistics on just how many students are enrolled illegally in schools that are outside the district where they live. The School Board Association here in New Jersey says they don't track that data. But there are more than 500 school districts here in this state. And because in many cases there are poorly performing schools just blocks away from highly performing schools, Messis says that in fact border hopping happens all the time.
There's one specific district in New Jersey where it's very common for them to have over 100 students per year that are actually out of district. And they confront them, they have residency officers that'll confront the parents and say, look, you don't live in the district, you have to register in the school district that you actually belong to.
How do you feel about it personally? I mean, like in theory, everybody's public school should be roughly equivalent, right?
Basically, as an investigator, I try not to get involved into the personal aspect of why people are doing what they're doing. Bottom line, they're breaking the law.
From the taxes of the people who live in this district.
It's roughly 90%.
90.
90%.
Have you hired a private investigator before?
We have. We've had to. And it breaks your heart to do that, but you know that there is 5,000 community members that you're responsible for. And you have an ultimate responsibility as the superintendent. But as an educator, like I said, that's the piece that drives your heart.
In New Jersey, the consequences include expulsion or paying back the school district's tuition.
And welcome back. Before the break, our America Tonight special correspondent Soledad O'Brien reported on boundary hopping. That's a phenomenon when families who sneak their kids into the good schools right out of their own districts. Our special correspondent Soledad O'Brien rejoins us now. Yeah, really, Soledad. I mean, there's so many places you hear that here in the Washington area. We hear that so often. But think about this. I mean, I'm sure districts are trying to control their costs and all this. I'm sure that there is a need for taxpayers to think, well, look, you paid your taxes. You're supposed to just take what the education system gives you. What is the solution? I mean, aside from, well, what's really making all the schools fair and how practical is that? What's the solution here?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. There are some programs where the schools can opt in to take some students, but at the end of the day, when taxpayers are footing the bill for, say, 98% of the cost, there is a sense from some of the people in town that, listen, we actually pay for the overwhelming amount of what this tuition is, and so we should be able to limit who's, has access to it. And of course, you have people who have a lower tax base, or even sometimes they're spending a lot of money on those students.
America Tonight special correspondent Soledad O'Brien, thanks for following up on this important story. Really something that matters to a lot of people.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Soledad.
Thank you very much. You bet.